Hello and welcome to Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin and this is the show where you can have your property related questions answered by our team of experts. And joining me today is Dr. Daniel Moses, CEO of Property Wealth Education Limited. Welcome, Daniel.
Thank you for having me.
I should just explain, Daniel's really created a wonderful concept of educating and mentoring people who perhaps wouldn't normally fit the profile of the average property investor. I think that's fair to say, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
And Daniel's doing a great job bringing people from the perhaps sometimes ethnic minorities into the property investment business, and I think that's very commendable, Daniel. Really do.
Yeah, absolutely.
We'll be very happy to help you on the way with that.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, joining Daniel is John Reynolds. John, you've been on our programme many times before. Good to have you back, CEO of Titan Property Developments. A couple of things we've got to say. Known to your friends as Professor John.
From today, an esteemed company.
Yeah. And I think I was also promised to say happy birthday to Mrs. Reynolds.
Oh,
so there we are.
She'll be made up.
Okay, jolly good. All right, well, we better get on with the job in hand, which are the questions. And Dr. Moses, Daniel, you're going first. I'm looking to take my first steps into property investing, and from the research I've done, I believe that the HMO strategy fits my investment criteria best. What are the biggest potential pitfalls to this strategy, and what should I look out for to avoid?
So I think one of the biggest pitfalls a lot of newbie property investors or entrepreneurs, I would say, getting into the HMO strategy is usually due to lack of due diligence. One of the major reasons is most people watch different things on YouTube these days and just want to convert a house from a standard C3 property into a C4 without knowing that there are a lot of rules and regulations that needs to be followed through in order for you to change a single family dwelling into a house of multiple occupation. So there are rules that must be met in terms of the council regulations, room sizes, Article 4 restrictions as well. So you don't want to turn a house of, a standard dwelling of C3 property into a C4, not knowing there's already an Article 4 direction already in place, which is the removal of permitted development right, and then converting that property into a house of multiple dwelling, and then you're unable to exit, your mortgage, because your certain lenders don't do the house of multiple occupations style lending. So it's very, very important to, number one, do your due diligence as to, what the council requirements are, and as well as what the lending criteria are. And finally, the removal of permitted development rights.
Okay. Daniel, why do differing councils have different views about HMO properties? I mean, in some areas, it's just an absolute no-no, isn't it?
Yeah, it's absolutely no. So they have actually now implemented the full Article 4 direction in place, which means they've removed that permitted development rights. You have to now seek planning in order for you to convert a standard C3 property into a C4, which is a small HMO that can take up to 6 multiple occupants in that property. So some councils just say no, because, for example, there are few boroughs in London that have been very strict. I mean, one of the biggest issues has been, for example, Newham Borough. They've been very strict on this from a very long time, because over time, there were issues around, over 10 people, 20 people, even just living in one particular property. Obviously, with things like, hazard, fire risk,
sure,
and the list can go on. So, and they've had situations where the multiple people living in this property has cost, people have gone to lose their lives because of fire. You can't have 20 people without, having the appropriate fire risk assessment regulations in place. So boroughs to boroughs have implemented these rules because of the level of, again, migration, just to kind of protect, people's life, basically. Then there are other boroughs that are still very loose on it, because they haven't had the issues of overpopulation and migration and all these things. So from borough to borough, there are just different things that they look at to see, okay, what can we do to make sure we prevent, housing safety issues where, excessive number of people are living together and there is no safety standard being met.
Yeah. Do you think it's incumbent on the councils to perhaps offer, I'm going to use the word loosely, some kind of education for people to understand the logic of their decisions? I mean, for somebody going, you for instance, perhaps bring somebody into the world of investment, they're looking at having an HMO. Apart from paying for a private course of information, do you think the councils ought to be offering this information out? Are there such books or leaflets or courses?
The councils don't like HMOs, they typically do.
Well, they don't, but they say, when I was a kid, you'd call them a bed sit, wouldn't you?
Or student digs.
Student digs, yeah. But they must solve a huge amount of sort of capacity shortage in terms of housing. I mean, it's a commendable exercise, isn't it? And
people like living like that from a social point of view, don't they? A lot of people don't want to live on their own. They'd much rather live in a social environment. They've got their privacy of their room, but they've got a communal area.
Yeah.
But I mean, there are some schemes we've looked at here. They're absolutely, they're almost like small hotels. They're wonderful. They've got cinema rooms, they've got, recreational rooms, IT rooms. Everything's based around a sort of social centre.
Yeah.
I mean, they really are quite sophisticated.
Yeah.
I mean, there's nothing wrong with the idea, is there?
But that's also something you've got to be careful of if you're looking at it as per the question to Daniel, look at the competition, because if there are people doing cinema rooms and including, from Sky to the gardener to the cleaner and so on, all inclusive, and you're not, they're the ones that are going to rent first, depending on price point and so on. So there's a due diligence to be done, because that was awesome from a technical point of view. But then there's the whole choose your location wisely.
Yeah.
If you go in the middle of the New Forest, you're not going to fill 6 or 7 rooms.
Yeah.
If you go to Milton Keynes, it's probably saturated. So there's that whole...
You're going to have to look at the employment demographics, aren't you?
Totally.
The commercial demographics of what's going on around. I mean, I can remember doing for a very big company, they'd been talked into a development in I don't know, what shall I say, a tertiary area of London. And what they'd done, they'd built a scheme which just took the scheme just out of the bounds of affordability in that particular area, and that's a classic mistake, isn't it? And it's a mistake a lot of new investors make.
Definitely. I think the other thing is they can be frowned upon from the council's point, and they can be frowned upon from the neighbouring community as well. One of the things that back in my day with HMOs was you let the neighbours know what you were doing, and you let them know you're going to do the property up to a nice standard, depending on what your model is. But that was what my model was, and I know that's a key part of yours. And let them know that, actually decent tenants, often these people were doctors or lawyers or just, the working professional, rather than the classic kind of, this is going to be a party house and noisy and so on, and let them know. And then actually that removed objections that might have come up and any kind of preconceived ideas of what was going to happen there.
Yeah.
And then actually some of those people, when they were looking to move, would be the people that would ring and say, would you be interested in buying my house? And
I mean, just to kind of add to that, the first thing first is that the council, the local authorities kind of short of these types of homes, by the way. So it's quite interesting because there's shortage of housing in the country. All right, there's not enough affordable homes to rent. And HMO do fill that gap of, people who are looking to genuinely rent and they can't afford to rent a flat, a 1-bed flat, a 2-bed flat, and renting rooms. And plus, just to quickly add something else, when I first came to this country 20 plus years ago, I personally stayed in an HMO myself. And the kind of HMOs that I stayed at that time wasn't a luxury one.
No.
It was the one where, 5 or 7 or 8 of us staying in the same house, sharing one bathroom. But obviously the standard is going to be better now. There's so much regulation in it. And then the local neighbors as well, thinking that it's a house full of so many people and they keep reporting the different cases, and the council just want to play safe, and by removing all this.
But it's the same as here in Canary Wharf 20 years ago when it was first built. If you didn't work in the financial sector, you wouldn't want to be here. But what there was a lot of studio 1-bedroom flats, which were quite economic to buy because effectively it's the East End of London. So a lot of people working for the banks and the financial institutions were keeping their country home, buying a studio or a one-bedroom flat here. But now we're faced with one-bedroom flats around. I mean, you can look out the building next door, one-bedroom flat, £850,000 for 500 square feet. You know, you're not going to be having that as just as a tuck away second property, are you? You just can't do it. So I think the potential for HMOs is tremendous. But anyway, let's move on. John, your question. Right, I think you'll remember this as a developer. Sellers packs was scrapped in 2010. But this has resulted in conveyancing times reaching up to now an average of 150 days. In essence, the sellers packs were introduced to stop people just putting their properties on the market just to test it, and further supply conveyancers with the necessary information to quickly and efficiently process any sale. Should these packs or something similar be brought back?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, they were brought in, as you say, to stop speculative, listings, but they created a bigger problem. And actually, on the back of COVID and some of the changes that have come in there, forced and through, I'm going to say, lethargy, to be polite to, people involved in the searches, the legal side of things. I think 150 days is generous. You know, I lost a sale yesterday just purely because through the process, the chap, it's not related, but he's lost his job and now can't purchase. But if he'd been able to get that purchase through in November, December, and he agreed it in August, I'm a happy developer.
It would have been done,
that's not answering the question. But the point is, it's so slow. I don't think bringing it back how it was clearly solves the problem. But we have incredible technology now. We have a way of joining up information, so maybe aggregating information that from a conveyancing point of view could all be stored. So it need to be accredited and verified. Well, but why can't you do that?
I've said to you before, I see land registry as that vehicle. Yeah. All the searches, whether it's for contaminated land, flood relief, whatever,
exactly. Put it all there.
All with them, and it can be paid for by solicitors paying into a fee structure.
Yeah. And by the time you've paid these legal fees, and time is money, it's a better system. I think is it Sprift that are doing that, and they're the only ones I've heard of. And why would that not be something that could be embraced, where the purchaser, the seller, and ultimately the lawyer gluing it all together, and the estate agents feeding in? It's literally all the information's there.
You're so right about the loss of sales because of time. I mean, I was taught in business, never let a deal go over the weekend because then get run over, smacked by a bus or whatever else. Yeah. So get it done.
Yeah.
And when you're taking up to sort of 6 months sometimes to do a conveyance, I mean, it's nonsense.
But also that's in context of how we just answered that, from maybe a developer point of view and so on. The flip of it is I was selling a house near where I live that I've converted into a nice 5-bedroom family home. And the people that are buying it wanted to be in by Christmas. And we're filming now early January. So they wanted to be in. And because of the slow processes and the effects within the chain as well, and that everyone was motivated. And then, a few things that were human, one of the lawyers low down the chain suddenly wasn't available when they could have done. But the point is, the system's broken. And then these people that had made all these plans to try and be where they wanted to be by Christmas weren't able to. And then that costs time and money. There's further mortgages to be paid or rents to be paid, or you know what I mean. So it definitely needs changing. I just don't know the answer to the question. In just bringing back sellers packs, it can be done more sophisticated,
logistics, isn't it?
Yeah, and in a better way using tech, definitely.
Okay, well that's all we've got time for in this half of the show. But just before we go, what have you bought Mrs. Reynolds for her birthday then?
I'm going to keep that a secret.
It's a secret, is it? Okay.
What have you got her?
Daniel, in terms of HMOs, what do you think is the optimum size in terms of occupants? Income must increase with larger HMOs, but it would be good to know the potential drawbacks of going bigger. I suppose that could be in terms of either legislation or regulations, could it?
I mean, there are two classes of an HMO. You have the smaller HMOs and you have the larger HMOs. The smaller HMOs are regulated under the C4 Act. And then the larger HMOs are regulated under sui generis. So the smaller HMOs is when you have 1 to 6 people. So that's comes under the mandatory license. And when you then have 7, 8, 9, 10 people and above to number 20, it comes under sui generis. So, and these are just different use classes that's been used to identify, the number of people that lives in there. And obviously the sui generis means that in the sui generis, it just means basically anything that the regulation cannot identify.
Just to pause you there.
Yeah.
When they're assessing the size, is it the number of rooms or actually the number of people that occupy at any one time?
People.
Okay.
It's always about people who are unrelated. So it's 1 to 6 people who are unrelated, and that would be a C.
So if you have a husband and wife living in one room, is that classed as one person then?
If you have a husband and wife living in one room in an HMO, and then you have 4 unrelated people, it will still be classified as a 6 people. 6 people. HMO.
Okay, all right. Okay, so coming on, so you've got the bigger ones that will do up to, well, any number.
Any numbers.
Okay. What are the extra regulations that might, come into force there? I
mean, when you have a 6 people dwelling HMO, which is under the mandatory licensing, by law and regulation, you need to inspect the communal areas and test the alarm on a monthly basis.
Okay.
But when you have 7, 8 to 10, or as many people who are there, it's almost like you're running a commercial building. So it means the alarms have to be tested on a weekly basis, sounded at a particular time, inspected on a particular time. Obviously, the more people, the more hazard that can happen. So the regulation is stricter when you have a sui generis HMO rather than when you have just a number 6 people dwelling HMO where the regulation is a bit more relaxed.
Do you find that right? I mean, I just think sort of discounting people's lives or potential danger because there's less than 7 of them is a little bit strange, really. Or is that me being difficult?
I'm not going to comment on the legislation. I was doing HMOs before any legislation came in at all, and some of the legislation that's come in is questionable. I think I look at it from a practical point of view. So depending on where you're investing and from a development point of view, is it worth going past the threshold to then actually have the opportunity to have more rooms, to then get more income, to get more yield. And you are increasing potentially, obviously increasing the size of the property and therefore the value of the property. But that's got to be determined by whether the actual demand is there in the first place. Mm-hmm. And depending on where you do it, if you're doing it in a high pound per square foot rental area, then it could be worth it. It might not be worth it so much if you're in an area that doesn't warrant that. That's where I'm coming from. I totally get. That's probably more a question back to you in terms of the actual, validity of the legislation.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of the number of people living in a property, as per 6 to whether 7 and 8 or 9, in terms of legislation and regulation, it's not that the government or the regulation cares whether it's 6 people, let's look after you, or whether it's 7 people, let's be a bit more sensitive. But from my understanding, from my perspective, it's just knowing that there is a change when you have 1 to 6 people living in a property that needs to be regulated by a mandatory license, C4 use, and then you have 7, 8 to 9, 10 people, and there's a level of compliance that needs to be met. In terms of income-wise, yes, when you have 7, 8 to 9 bedrooms and 9 people living in that property, more yield. And in terms of valuation, automatically that comes under a commercial valuation property. When you have a 1 to 6 people living in a property, then usually the valuers might also look at it in a different way. The income might also be a bit more not as greater as when you have 8 beds to 10 beds to 12 beds. It just varies, basically.
I think the thought of trying to control and manage 9, 10, 12 people in a single building just frightens me to death.
Yeah, it reminds me actually, and you've got to be careful, it's worth mentioning, and I'm sure you've got this experience, but if you fill a property full of just male, then it's not necessarily that well looked after. And actually, I had it before where some of these guys all got together and were like, my God, the landlord's making a fortune. And they all removed themselves and got themselves a property that did it differently. If you have just females, actually, in context of many examples, a lot of them actually fell out, and you suddenly have voids because they had actually arguments and so on. You need to mix the sexes, and you need to mix the age side of it, because then actually there's a much better interaction. Yeah. Just going back to you saying about managing them, it's the little micro details. You can actually make your life a lot easier as an HMO landlord by just those
good balanced occupational mixes.
Yeah. I mean, and you've got to provide facilities. You think about the use of the washing machines and the fridge space and so on. If you've got 15 people in an HMO, you need to make sure you're providing the right amount of facilities.
Yeah, I mean, if you have a 6 people dwelling HMO, you just need a 4-burner cooker in the property. When you have a 7 to 8 people now, you need 2 wash hand basins, you need a set of washing machine, you need to have 8 burner in the property. Again, it's more work when you have 7, 8 to 9 people.
Do you know what, Daniel? I think I'm just going to leave it to you. All right. Thank you for that. John, now I know as a developer you'll have your views on this, because developers do use agents to sell their product, obviously, and that's sometimes quite a critical choice to make.
Yeah.
We're often, as developers, you're forced into using one particular agent because you perhaps bought the land from them. That always doesn't automatically give them the sort of qualifications to make the sales, but they think it does. Yeah. Sometimes you sort of go out to tender almost. But this question says this: with the sale and restructuring of one of the leading online only agents, and I presume that's one of a certain colour.
Yeah.
Do the panel think that the hype surrounding this form of agency is now over, and we're going to see a return to conventional high street agency operations?
That's interesting. Yeah, very relevant. When you say see a return, I don't think the online agency that is having issues replaced anything. I think they tried to do what I think should continue to be persevered, which is using technology and allowing people to have more control, like Auto Trader selling your own car, if you like, rather than going to a trade-in. But what I would say, and maybe I'm controversial in this, you said it, if I buy the land through an agent, typically I want to be loyal, and then that's instructed with them on the sales. Often it's very different people. So I need to know that I might get on really well with the person that sold me, the person in the land division, but are the new home sales guys really good at what they do?
Yeah.
You can find that out through track record or through previous dealings. But there's something about a real person showing people around the property, and it's such a personable thing. It's where these people are going to live. It's where they're investing a huge chunk of money that still feels really relevant. And there are questions over certain people who are in a estate agency about really, are they just opening the door and let you in? And then a really good agent does earn their money. And I see that on my side of the fence as a developer. I disinstructed an agent summer of last year, really lovely product in a scheme in Salisbury, and I'd nearly sold them all going into Christmas. Same product. It's a tough market, but there was a lethargy. There was just not enough activity. So for me, I was looking at who's proactive, who's hungry, and that's a personal thing. Now, of course, we covered it in the first half of the program. Technology advancements for me mean that there's possibly a more sophisticated way of doing it, but it wasn't being done particularly well, and the one that's been talked about in the question.
I think the difficulty I see today, we have a number of people come into the studio here talking to us about various different agency activities. I mean, the current trend is to, I think all these guys that were working for these online agents have now gone away. There's this, they're self-employed now. So they're acting as self-employed agents out in the market, sometimes under the umbrella of a company, sometimes not. I do question the qualifications of these people and their abilities, and I think that's where it falls down. If I'm going to have somebody handling a sale for me of perhaps £2 million or £3 million, I want somebody competent. I mean, I've experienced this. I use quite a good agent, well, generally a good agent on a flat I've got here. But, I had a negotiator around. She stood in the kitchen with these people, and she sort of looked around and said, "This is the kitchen." And I thought,
Yeah.
no, you're kidding. I've always wondered what all these machines were for, you know. But you know, and then they'll open the door and say, this is the second bedroom. And, oh, no, sorry, it's the bathroom. You know, because they haven't done their due diligence before. And this is the problem of not having somebody governed by good protocol from a solid agent, you know, good training, good...
Yeah.
You
They
know.
literally just opening the door. The first property I ever bought with Leslie, now my wife, we asked the agent politely to wait outside because literally this is the main bedroom.
Yeah.
I can see that. And you've got floor plans in front of me as well, right? And what we're looking at is maybe we put an ensuite in there, maybe we extend here, maybe we do this and that. And that's not for the agent to be necessarily advising and so on, but just having more depth of knowledge.
Depth of knowledge.
And,
that's the expression.
Experience, and actually then demonstrating that, you know. So for me, it was like, actually, it's all right, we'll just go, and this is years ago, but it was an experience where, because I deal with probably more sophisticated agents in the developer world, but just to understand that level of, that lack of knowledge, and just why are you here? And yet you still get paid exactly the same fee as someone that potentially might be really good at what they do and said, we've actually had a thought, and the neighbours 3 down have done this, and actually we sold that house for substantially more, and so on. Just having comparable information.
I do just think sometimes some of the different ideas that come into the market, and I don't think our property market is actually too bad as it is. We're safe, we have good legislation about property regulations, about conveyancing, about ownership. But a lot of people do try these days to solve problems that aren't really there. And I think that's where we run into trouble in a way. And I think there's a degree of that with the online agent. I thought you came up with a good comparison, you know, which is Auto Trader.
Yeah.
You know, are we trying to sell property like Auto Trader? And that's a good comparison. But I think, no, we're not.
So there's risks involved in that. I think only 10% of people sell their cars through Auto Trader. Yeah. So I don't know what it was through the online.
The whole thing about sell your property for free, it's what is really the biggest problem, isn't it? Because a lot of property owners are trying to sell property for free, and because they're trying to sell property for free, they go into a lot of these online agents where, you know, the service is really poor. Just open the door for you. There you go. Have a look. Look. Oh, you're trying to ask a question. Oh, you need to ring the office.
Yeah.
Which is
yeah. You're back to needing someone.
Tell me a little bit about the area. Yeah. Oh, actually, I don't know. You need to speak to the office.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's all we've got time for. So big thank you to Dr. Daniel Moses. Thank you for coming in, Daniel.
Thank you very much.
Thank you to John Reynolds once again. Good to see you.
Pleasure.
Thank you for your input. Great stuff. I'm Stephen Galpin. Join me again next time on Property Question Time. Look forward to seeing you.